Well, if I could ask everyone to take your seats, please. We are in the home stretch. Appreciate your longevity and patience as we are nearing the end of what I know is a very long day. Let me find my place here. First of all, thanks to Senator Woodhouse and Assemblywoman Miller for the previous conversation. Really appreciate their openness and so forth, and thanks to Dr. Mariano for his time. Our final panel is different from any that we've had so far today. The goal I mentioned at the beginning of the day was to get together a variety of diverse voices. Well, this last panel, I think, is an excellent example of that. It includes an incredible lineup of thought leaders who are, in their individual and different ways, leading Nevada education into this new era. The panel is moderated by someone who has long been deeply engaged in education in our community and state. My friend and colleague, President and Chief Executive Officer of Grant a Gift Autism Foundation, Terri Janison. Terri, go ahead and come on up, please. The individual members of the panel will explore how, from their unique perspectives, the ideas that have emerged in today's conversation and others that they have heard, they may see as pressing and may play out over the next several months. I will ask each of them to come up as I introduce them. I'm delighted to introduce Jeremy Aguero, Principal Analyst, Applied Analysis. Jeremy, welcome. Hiding at the back of the line, but next on my list, someone who I've come to have tremendous respect for, Jan Jones Blackhurst, Executive Vice President, Public Policy and Corporate Responsibility, Caesars Entertainment, who I will note at the outset has laryngitis. So next up is someone who was here early. It seems to be people move to the back of the line when they're supposed to be introduced next. Someone who spoke to us earlier today, but who's come back to share some thoughts with us, Superintendent Jesús Jara, Superintendent of Clark County Schools. Richard Knoeppel, 2019 Nevada Teacher of the Year, someone I have not met before, but I'm looking to hearing from. Richard? There she is. Dr. Lisa Morris-Hibbler, Director of the Department of Youth Development and Social Innovation, City of Las Vegas. Dr. Morris-Hibbler. And again, another of our wonderful partners, someone who I've also come to respect very, very much. Sean Parker, Executive Director, Teach for America, Las Vegas. Sean, welcome.
All right, I guess I'm up, huh? Thank you guys so much for staying. I had the opportunity to do this last year, and Kim put me at the very end of the day, and I'm like, why do you do this? Do you just hate me? So thank you guys for staying. I'm telling you, I'm very excited because if you all, let's just have a conversation. I've known so many of you for so many years, and what I'm most excited about today for this panel is to just talk about what can we do? Because we've been here all day, and we've heard so many different conversations about different issues and things that are upcoming. But I think what we'd love to hear from this group is, okay, what can we do now? What can we as a community, as a state, do to make it the best for our children? So I actually have one leading question that I'm going to ask of each one of you, and then we've got a couple of separate ones, okay? So the question was, given the themes and topics as today, what do you envision to see as the largest issue to come in front of the 2019 session?
Jane, since I can't talk, I'll do it. Changing the funding formula.
Okay.
We have a funding formula from 30 years ago.
So changing the funding formula. I'll support you here, Jan.
Me?
Sure.
Look, I don't know that you can just point to one thing. I think the transition
Jeremy,
between...
you've got one. Move on.
But look, I think the transition between the Sandoval administration and the legislature that it has and what the new legislature is going to do with the funding formula and everything that comes into education. Look, we have not always been transparent or honest with ourselves relative to how we fund education, right? We are certainly not always transparent and honest with ourselves relative to the revenues that are dedicated to education. And I think that the transition of that between the last administration and this administration, what they're going to do with that, what the strategy is, what they're going to develop and make happen, I think it's all going to come down to the funding formula. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
To Jeremy's point, let's be very honest. When
Jeremy's point, let's be very honest.
When I was first elected mayor of Las Vegas, we keep increasing funding for education. But what they do is they allocate it to education, and it goes there. But then they take the rest of the money that's in education and they move it out the back to something else. So it's never been accretive.
Superintendent Jara.
So I will agree with my colleagues to my left, and I think the funding formula it's critical to address. Right, one of the things that in my short 5 months that I've been here, what I have seen and witnessed is that we've increased the standards, increase really the expectations, but really to the point, which I alluded to this morning, we have not really fixed the real issue. The core issues is addressing the change of the DSA and the weighted formula. And one of the things that I'd also like to piggyback on what Jeremy mentioned is really critical is how do we transition, really moving into putting a stamp and really accelerating from Governor Sandoval's administration to where we want to go. So what we want to see, because what I've seen coming in, there's been a lot of things that mirror what the state of Florida was doing, right? But we haven't funded it. It hasn't been really an investment. And I'm not saying that Florida is funding education at some of the best levels, because they're not. But they've made efforts, and I think one of the things that I want to see the bar being raised, I want to continue to see the achievement of our children, but then address the core issue.
Okay.
Address the core issue.
So Richard, you have been a teacher in this district for a very long time, sir. And first of all, congratulations on your Teacher of the Year for the state of Nevada. Can you talk a little bit about the DSA. How have you seen it affect the system?
My experience with DSA is it's a black hole that a lot of things go into and they never come out. We were talking about things like school psychs and providing services for students this morning, and knowing Katie Dockweiler and knowing how that process works, and having sat with different legislators over the years and knowing that those monies go in there, they're earmarked for services like that, and then they disappear. I mean, it's not that the money isn't there, at least that's what my understanding is, that the money isn't getting there. And so that's something that we really need to focus on during this legislative session. I mean, there needs to be a system of accountability. And there really doesn't seem to be, at least in my perspective as a teacher. You see things come down, you hear that things are coming down. As a teacher leader, I go and I advocate. I have sat and I provided testimony for multiple things over the years, and things get passed, but things never seem to change. Like Janet said, it kind of keeps getting swept out the back door. And so there is a lot of supplanting, and that's a word that was used earlier this morning. And so I think it's important that we look back retrospectively as a state and as educators and say, where is this money going? Why are we not getting the money that we've been promised?
So that's another accountability question we're going to have a little bit as we started out this morning. Dr. Morris-Hibbler.
Yes, thank you. For me, I think that we need to really figure out what it would cost to have the education system that we need from pre-K to post-secondary so that we can stop pitting one education system against the other.
Okay.
I think I'll agree with the fellow panelists that funding is necessary and name that it's not just about funding. We know from, for example, the equity report that came out recently that we're not, even with the funding that we do have, it's not getting equitably to all of our kids. And there are systems in Nevada that are working. We have some excellent schools, and we have some excellent schools to learn from. And so I hope the legislature takes a look at what is working, and we talked about this in the last panel, The funds that are the SB 178 funds, I believe, those are working. Let's double down on that. But let's do it in a data-informed way. We heard from our friends from Bellwether this morning. And if we're not being able to track and see if the funding is effective, then why are we doing it? And so I think that I agree that we need more funding. And when we put in place more funding, let's track its efficacy.
So, boy, that opens up so many different questions. I think I want to go back and start though with the funding formula, because Dr. Jara, this morning had talked about, well, what does this funding look like? If the funding formula. So, do we just haul it, or do we start from scratch? And so, Jeremy, I'd really love for you've been a part of this conversation from a data standpoint for a very long time. What would it look like if we threw it all out and started from scratch?
Well, I mean, what would it look like? I mean, you'd start with $3 billion and decide if this is the best way for you to allocate it to funding education, which I think is exactly what's been said. You know, I think Dr. Morris-Hibbler, makes an excellent point. I think all the rest of the panelists make excellent points as well. When we're thinking about the way we fund education, we're thinking about where the money comes from, and what we're going to do. There's all kinds of things that we wouldn't normally do. Beside the fact the way that the formula sort of flows through, which is confusing and difficult anyway. I think the comment that was made, we deposit money in there and then we forget about it and we move the general fund in order to make it not actually be additional money. We've done that since the 1960s, and we are great at it. We put money in there, we pat ourselves on the back and say we just gave money to education, and then we just dump it right out from the other side. And I mean, that's sort of a ridiculous thing for us to do.
But
I think
before
that
you go on there, though, so where is that accountability piece there? So if you guys are saying that, and that really is true, so then who's holding the state accountable to where the money is going?
The problem is, it's not that nobody is not holding the state accountable. It's this state has been never willing to raise the taxes and do what you need to do to both pay for services and pay for appropriate education. And you couldn't even get the legislature last session to remove the cap on property tax, which doesn't have anything to do, it's not raising anybody's taxes. It's been artificially capped. So maybe it takes some true belief in what this state could be and should be, and then somebody being willing to make that vote.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, you guys all said you're putting money in, and we don't know where it goes. So
It's not
what
that
is
we
that?
don't know where it goes. It's that we kept increasing funding for education. But let's use the lottery as an example. People love their lotteries, and they love their lotteries. Why? It funds education. In only one state, Georgia, does it really just fund education. So there's the difference. You keep adding money to the school distributed account, but wink and a nod. That doesn't mean you can't take money that's down there and move it over to roads, and can't move it to roads.
Right, but if
Creative
we're
accounts.
going to talk about developing actual solutions for it, right? I mean, I think
Then you
there's
need
many
some
things we
honesty
could
and
actually do. I think
transparency
you do.
about what's
And look, I think what Dr. Hibbler said, I think is very insightful. I think one of the things we need to do is actually develop a fully funded education budget and have legislators vote for that and vote for the difference between what we're actually funding and what the fully funded budget actually looks like. Let's bring some transparency to the difference between what we're doing and what we're aspiring to do. Whatever that number is, whatever they come down to, let's make sure that it's clear the difference between the two. If we don't like the distributive school account, we don't like the Nevada plan, that's fine. Let's freeze it today. Let's freeze it today and say that's it. We're only going to fund it this way, and every new dollar that comes in, we're going to spend it a little bit differently. There's no reason that the money has to fall out of the bottom of the distributed school account. We could save that. We could create a rainy day fund for education. That is like the worst insurance policy in the history of mankind, right? There were all kinds of reversions that fell out of that Nevada plan, and then when things got really bad, we then cut education and we sailed our pirate ship even into capital funds in order to make it work. And I was part of doing that because I'll be honest with you, in 2011 and 2013, we didn't have a choice. Right? When we had the 3% not to exceed 13 room tax, we didn't have a choice, because the only thing that people care more about education on is being able to have food on the table and have a job. And so we had to make sure that we were dealing with that. But even when we got to the point where we were ready to have some of these real conversations about education, we fast forward to 2015 when we make some of these changes and we pat ourselves on the back because of the commerce tax and some of the things that we did. The amount of the increase in taxes that we generated was almost exactly the same as the deficit that we had created in property tax a decade before, right? And so all we're doing is filling in a gap, and we're never getting forward.
Dr. Jara.
Go ahead.
I'm going to give this to Dr. Jara, but that's fine. But you can't have that conversation if you're not going to have the conversation where you're going to get the accretive capital.
I like the idea of freezing where we are. I do like that idea, freezing the formula where we are today. And then, with any new money, then start looking at, if I'm hearing you correctly, Jeremy, then let's start looking at where do we invest. And then let's stop doing what's not working. Let's stop doing what's not working, and then maybe move it into an account or whatever it is. Then it's an increase in funding. But you know, some of the things that we need to do is because Sean, you hit it right on the nail on the head. There's great things happening. I said that this morning in some of our schools, some of our school populations that are neediest. There's great things. Our principals and our teachers are doing some phenomenal work. It's then let's replicate that as a system, but then let's just invest and then stop wasting resources and putting it into where we're seeing the benefits.
So can you all, who else was here earlier today? Is anybody else? So Richard, can you speak to a little bit about what Dr. Jara just said about some of the other conversations you heard, especially around like the workforce development and the recruiting and the
I was actually
retaining?
going to address the funding because I mean, there are plans that are out there now. And so, you know, Senator Woodhouse had said before, like, we can't fund up here, but we can't stay here. So let's target for the middle. And so I know that Dr. Canavero has a plan because I've sat in meetings with him and we've discussed this. And so the question came up earlier, what can we do to support education? People need to go out and support these bills. Because if we support the bills and teachers can leave the classrooms and provide expert testimony, because the conversation was also had this morning about how there's rooms where there's nobody there. I have to teach all day. I mean, even as teacher of the year, I don't think that I'm gonna, hey, Jesús, can I take a day off? You know, can I just go down and
But that's so
testify?
fair
I mean,
question, but I have to tell you, so years ago when we were on the board, if you're a teacher, and if I'm a parent, I want you in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So I think maybe should we not change the discussion then about how we hold these legislative sessions to allow for the input? Because I don't want you out of the classroom.
Agreed. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's no place I'd rather be in the classroom. I mean, I didn't come here until almost 11 o'clock this morning because I felt it was necessary that I spent my first 4 periods today teaching my classes. But I also felt it was important to be here as a teacher, to represent educators and to have people hear my voice, because it's one of the things that never happens. As a society, as Nevadans, we throw the term teacher leader around in a very cavalier fashion. And so, you know, teacher leaders are the people that are supposed to be out there. We're supposed to be providing testimony. We're supposed to be advocates for education, but we're really never given the opportunity. Like, this is an opportunity to be at the table with all of these people that hold high-profile positions in this city and this state. And I'm the odd man out. But why is that? If education is that important in this state, why are teachers not a part of the equation?
So I have a
I would just say that I feel in many ways that we're like on this perpetual cycle, maybe a little bit on the gerbil wheel. And I say that because we never ever just sit down and figure out what it costs all the way through. If we're going to talk about workforce development, we got to go all the way back to pre-K. If we want to talk about having stronger schools, we need to talk about, are we preparing our kids for kindergarten readiness so we can keep them on track so that they can graduate? And so what happens is every session we come up and we say we need more money, and then people say, we gave you more money, but we never say, well, this is what it costs. If you want every school to be a CTE, if you want every school to perform like a magnet, if you want every student to be in a 5-star school, if you want every child to have a strong start, this is what it costs. And that way, when we go and we can all collectively battle, because it always is a battle, we can go in a unified fashion that helps us to get what we need. What I see and I haven't been in the session as long as some of you, but from 11 and 13 and 15 and 17, and now we're headed into 19, it's always, this is the year of higher ed, this is the year of pre-K, this is the year of absolutely nothing, because we're not getting what we need for, it's like an entire system. And until we start thinking that way and stop allowing people to pretend as though education is not a journey, I don't think we'll ever get the adequate funding, because it's always a shell game. And so to me, and I don't know, I have to defer to Jeremy, he's our guru when it comes to putting numbers together. I think we talked a little bit about this last year, like we really need to get a group of people that are interested in putting together what it looks like. What does it take to make every school a 5-star school? What does it take to have pre-K in schools, or even have pre-K in the community? I mean, what are those things? What does it take to make sure that we don't have to have remedial education as kids come into higher ed? I mean, let's talk about what that costs, and then let's fight for that.
So that's true, but so Jeremy's going to answer, but I mean, we've had some of those studies done. So Jeremy, speak to that a little bit, because we've had these studies.
But there's no doubt that there's been a lot of studies. I mean, we can admire our problems like no community on earth, right? I mean, we're pretty amazing at that. But I think Lisa makes an excellent point. And I think what we've done is we've started to pit ourselves against each other, right? We've pitted teachers against students, right? Teachers want higher salaries, and how have we addressed that? We've jammed more kids into the classrooms and essentially translated that, where we now have among the highest classrooms in the entire United States, right? We've created this kind of imbalance. And now the conversation we're having is about funding the base. Because so many of the things that we've done have identified kids that have special education needs, whether that's a kid that's an English language learner or one that's academically talented. And we're going to wait for those individual students, and we're going to say, okay, that requires more funding. But if you don't increase the base, at the end of the day, all you're doing is taking money away from kids that don't have a label to try to address a kid that has a label. And I think that is the worst case scenario in terms of funding education. It's just another time where we're getting away from what we ultimately need to do. I think your point is exactly the right one, but we have to start thinking about making sure that that base is funded, because what we're starting to see now is the kids that aren't in Zoom schools or aren't in schools that are getting specific additional resource allocations. Those are the ones where we're starting to see a decline in performance, because we're taking away money from the best performing schools as a result of the fact that budget cuts become inevitable. And I think that may have been a better answer to what the biggest challenge is going to be over that next year.
I don't want to move us fully away from funding, but I think that funding is only a piece of what we're talking about here. We're talking about a new era of education. And this morning, Dr. Jara heard you say that we want to be #1 for kids in 5 years. And I heard the bellwether report around what is needed to get there. And I think one analogy or metaphor, I use those incorrectly sometimes, I apologize, is that if we had told the people who created the Las Vegas Strip, the resort gaming industry, 40 years ago, make all of the resorts as good as the best resort, we would have never gotten to where we are today. And so I think it's not just about telling all of our schools or all of our ed systems, make our schools the best, compare them to the existing best that we have. We have to really think about what is the future of education, and the system of education that we've had has been the same for almost 100 years. And that system of education is still producing kids. For the most part, producing kids sounds really bad, but that's what it feels like sometimes. It feels like it's a factory system for our students. And I think that we have to get away from that. We have to reimagine what a school looks like. So let's fund adequately, let's fund equitably, and let's figure out how to get all of our students to the place where they're at a basic floor of what excellence looks like. But I also call on all of us to say, then what does the future of education look like? How do we think of ourselves like an innovative system that spends maybe 10% of our funding thinking and dreaming about what that future looks like, and ensure that our kids that are in the communities that maybe don't have as much access get first pick of that? Because there's some private schools doing really cool things, there's some charter schools doing really good things, and there's some traditional district schools doing some really great things, but I think we need more of that in our system.
So, go ahead, Jan.
I just want to go back to, and I think our master teacher said it, how many of you have actually been to Carson City? And how much time have you spent up there? Did you go for a day, a week? Carson City is
a week. Who stays for at least a whole week? 4. Well, no, you can't. As a legislator, you can't say that. Sorry. Put your hands down.
So we meet every other year. We're not like other states where you meet every year. And we only can meet for 4 months. And if we don't go in really well organized with what we're looking for, we're going to leave what we get every year, the same thing. And to the point of teachers, I come from the gaming community. Nobody likes us. We got a 50% tax cut in Louisiana from a legislature that hated us. You know how he did it? Every single day, we sent up a bus with 300 employees with a badge that said 300 jobs for 3,000 jobs for 3,000 families. And they went up to the legislature and they sat in every single hearing. And at the end, they could go vote against me. What do they care about me? They couldn't vote against those workers, and they won't go vote against teachers. So maybe at some point, it's better to have them spending more time there so legislators see who they're really hurting.
Maybe those are the professional development days you guys can do in the contract negotiations during the legislature.
If I can go back and talk a little bit about what Sean Parker mentioned about what does the 21st century education look like. Because I think, yeah, funding is important, the formula, I think that's critical, but if we do not change how we're teaching kids, we're not going to continue, we're going to continue disengaging students in our learning, really, because it's really, and then what is our competitive edge? Forget local charters, private in the state of Nevada. Look at across the country. Look at international. So it's, if we don't change, you know, when you go in and you got principals and teachers trying to do the best, because it has to do with funding, I get that. However, if we do not, if children have to slow down when they walk into our schools, and I say that because they are moving at a fast pace at home with computers and access, and then they come and slow down and look at an old textbook because that's what we have. When you're competing with other kids across the state to get into the university and to post-secondary, we're at a disadvantage. That is an equity issue that needs to be addressed and really transforming not only the education, the formula, but our classroom instruction. And what does that 21st century classroom look like
So
for children?
This panel today was supposed to be about just what you're talking about, but not just having the conversation. It's what are we going to do? So you guys are talking about that, but what does that look like? So give examples of what, like Corey, Dr. Moore was talking earlier on the telehealth. What does it actually look like? And Richard, you may be able to speak to this as well. You're new into our state. What is out there that we're not doing that we should be doing?
So if I can, I just, when I came here, I was in Orlando for 6 years as a deputy superintendent, and we decided to really fund a one-to-one transforming education digital divide for our children, where, and as I left, all our middle schools and high schools had one-to-one. They all had devices, right? A lot of professional development for teachers. And the reason we did it, and obviously it's a little different state, the school board there had the ability to pass a referendum on a sales tax. So that's how they did it. So we did it when I was there. I don't count as we anymore. I'm here now, and I'm committed to Clark County. But it was professional development for teachers, and for principals, and then given the devices. And we saw children that were accelerating and then really communicating and working. You see kids in video conferencing one another from school to school. And it was something that was beautiful to see. Now, their goal was by 2021 have the entire 210 schools on a one-to-one. But it was having kids to access curriculum that was pushing our publishers. So we were driving the conversation with publishers to really change how they were doing business with us. So I think that's the possibility that we can do that here. But again, how do we stop using the resources here that we're not getting value and then moving it into reallocating for 21st century instruction? That's my job.
So I'll go one up on top of that. I mean, it's not just providing that kind of equity in terms of technology and things of that nature, but equity in terms of putting high-quality teachers in every classroom. And until we change the way that people look at educators in the state of Nevada and change the idea that we're not second-class citizens, that we're professionals, and I know that professionalism was brought up this morning. Why is education not looked at as being like the medical field?
Isn't that a national issue, though, not just
It's
Nevada?
a national issue, but I mean, but this is our state.
Okay.
So like I'm sitting in a policy fellowship right now with Teach Plus, and one of the things that I'm working on is structures and licensure structures and looking at how can we change the way that teachers are looked at in this state. And so I'll share like a little story. So as part of being the Teacher of the Year, I'm on the Superintendent Teacher Advisory Cabinet for the state of Nevada. And Leanne Morris' 2008 Teacher of the Year said, you know, when we were kids, probably most of us sitting up here, we used to play school. Why don't kids do that anymore? And I mean, and the big picture is that kids don't look at it as being a career. I made some notes, and the comment was made before is that it's our job. It's not a job, this is a career. A job is a short-term thing. A career is lifelong, and people talk about 30, 40 years in a career. People don't look at teaching as being a career, they look at it as being a job, and that's why people leave it so rapidly. That's the valid point. To get to the bigger picture, I mean, I don't know how this is going to be looked at, but I mean, there was a joke going around CCSD last year that our Title I schools were our teacher induction programs. Why is that? Why is it that we take our newest, brightest teachers, fresh out of school, that have technology backgrounds, things that I never had access to when I was in college, and put them in a Title I school without supports, where they're almost destined to fail? Why do we do that? So in order to have high quality teachers, we have to train them. We have to retain them, but a part of retention isn't necessarily just retaining them, it's providing them with ways to advance.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to, I mean, we can sit up here all day long and talk about what's happening, and this is in the past, and this has been going on. What are we going to do? So you're in the classroom. Give us some suggestions on what you would like to see, either this group up here.
I'll tell you what we're going to do.
That's what we're asking.
So we work with CCA and Nevada Succeeds, and we actually put together some things, and we put in some things that LCE and Senators Dennis and Woodhouse put together a bill draft request, BDR 389, and the proposal there is to do a study. And I don't know if that's really a technical term because it's changed a couple times, but to really look at what it would take to change how teachers are perceived and what teachers' career pathways look like.
Okay.
And so we've looked at all sorts of different states, but again, this is Nevada, this isn't New York, this isn't Ohio, this isn't Missouri. We have a very specific vision for where we want to be. And until we change the way that teachers are looked at, we change the way that teachers are actually inducted into the classrooms, and then we give them pathways to grow as professionals with compensation, we are never going to retain teachers in this state. And it's going to be the same vicious cycle that we see over and over and over again.
Sean, Lisa, go ahead.
So I want to come from a student perspective because I think we got to be working backwards. I mean, I think we need to see what skills do our young people need to be successful. Obviously we're in a fast-paced world. What do they need locally? What do they need internationally to compete? And then what does the classroom need to look like? Personally, I think that the technology is great. I love it. I think that there also needs to be some other manipulatives and ways that the kids can get hands-on experiences. I personally see, and this is no disrespect to the comprehensive high schools, but kids in the magnet schools or that are in a magnet program or a CTE are so engaged because people are not talking at them. They are learning from experts in the field around things that they are interested in, robotics, fire services, police services, all those different things. And that's what it really engages them as opposed to being in a classroom with 50 students trying to share a textbook. I think if we can do that, and again, the reason I talk about the funding is because unless you know what it is you're trying to build, you really don't know what you need. And that's why I talk about that, because I feel like we should, whatever we feel like is the best for those kids, that's the system we ought to be trying to build. And for today's system, if you talk to employers, because I wear a workforce development hat too, they'll talk about critical thinking and some of the other things that you need in some of today's jobs. We also need to be bringing back the apprenticeship. We swung the pendulum so far that everybody needs to go to college. Everybody's not going to go to college, but we definitely want to create a pathway so that you can continue on your education as far as you want to go. And I'm a proponent of college. I mean, you know, this is my go Rebs. But I just feel like the better off we are having the students and making sure that our schools are preparing them for those jobs. So we kind of got to work backwards on that.
So the Office of Owen is actually doing that with the apprenticeship. So they're doing that statewide. So I think that is coming back. But I would like to throw that back to you, Dr. Jara, about so what is happening, because that's not new information either. We know that the children that go to these the CTA education have a higher rate of graduation. What are you doing from the district standpoint, and maybe even statewide? I don't know if you guys have heard about this, about increasing that more in our comprehensive schools.
So it's a conversation we're having, and it goes back to the equity piece that I talked about this morning. Really, it shouldn't just be the magnets, and it shouldn't be the CTAs. It needs to be in every school, in all our comprehensive high schools. So the conversation is really, right now what we're looking at is really the equity piece, because when you really look at the population that we serve in those schools, it does not reflect the community that we serve as an entire system. So those are, because that gets into access into those programs. So we're analyzing that right now, but then also I'm having the conversations with our comprehensive high schools, is to say, well, why don't we do academies? Because it's something that we can do. Sometimes we get into this thing that we need more money. We just need to be creative with some of the resources that we have, and how do we reallocate them? You know, when you start looking at it as well, why don't we have a dual language program? Why don't we have different things that we can do in partnership with the workforce? I just had a 45-minute with the chancellor about how do we partner together on a K-20 piece. Because correct, as I said this morning, I want all kids that graduate to have the opportunity and the ability for them to make a choice, whether it's higher ed, the workforce. You know, because he was visiting Western High School. Western High School comprehensive, there's the HVAC academy there, but it's only for those kids that live and go to that school. The lucky ones that can go, and then when they get out, they can make $50,000, $60,000 a year as an 18-year-old. So then our conversation is, how do we then develop more? And how do we partner with the business community to help us? So it's a conversation starter for us, and it'll be rolled out in the strategic plan as we then move forward. But again, it goes back to one of the things that the chancellor and I talked about today is, where is the state currently funding right now to look at, make sure we're drawing up all the money from the state, and then if we need more, then how do we partner with the business community to then be able to do that for our kids?
Terri, I just want to say one thing to Superintendent's point. You said we know about CTAs, we know about magnets, so that's not a new thought, which is true. I don't know that anything up here so far has been a new thought. But what I will say is, I hope we're all tired of not hearing new thoughts. And I hope we are ready to fight for what we believe in. If CTEs and magnets and CTAs are that important, then why do we only have a roughly 12, 15,000 slots out of 321,000 kids? I mean, come on, get real. Are we serious? Because if we're serious about it, let's get some buses. I'll be using my personal money to get a bus. Let's get folks up there and let's get going. I feel like every year or every 2 years that we have these conversations, we're sacrificing another couple of years worth of students. They need our help today. So for me, anybody that knows me knows I'm action oriented. I'm ready to put on tennis shoes and damn near walk to Carson City, because I've had it, because we can't sacrifice our children. You know, we've got to get serious.
If I can jump in, I know Richard, because one of the things that you mentioned, and I've done a lot of community meetings and coffee shop meetings, and our principals were great and brought some students. And when I talked about the funding formula, and I'd had this conversation, I had some kids, and I think we have to fill up the bus with some of our kids, because our kids said afterwards, some of our seniors said, Superintendent, this is a movement that we need to get involved as kids. And I think it's an opportunity that we need to tap into some of our students, so then maybe there's a different conversation in Carson City.
Can I just ask, though, a couple of our legislators who are still here, what about having a road trip for those up in Carson City to come down for at least a week to the Sawyer building, so that we don't have to get all those buses and we don't have to go to do all those airplane rides? So can we put a BDR in for that? Okay, all right. Because I really do think that that's part of the problem. And I know people say, I know this, I'm not supposed to probably talk and let you guys do it, but I get very passionate about this. But it just makes me crazy because I know that you can go to Carson, you can go to the Sawyer building and hear your voice, but it is not the same. So when you do go up to Carson City and you're knocking on those doors, there's a whole different dialect and conversation when they get to see you face to face. So I really do think that the legislators need to come down to the South. And now that we have a Southern governor, we'll see what happens. So, sorry, now I'll stop.
I'll just add on briefly, which is you asked, like, what do we need to do? What are the examples? And I think we already have some examples, and sometimes we are stifling those opportunities. There are some that exist, like our CTAs, that we're letting go. But I think a few years ago, the Marzano Academy in CCSD started. I remember when I was studying to be a teacher, those were some of the foremost cutting edge research in education was from the Marzanos. And they chose CCSD as the place to start this potential elementary school to learn from and try a new model. And Dr. Jara, I think that you're allowing them to do that. I think we should just unleash it a little bit more and learn to see what is happening there at an even greater level. We should figure out what is it going to look like to almost just attempt education in a new way. Because I think we're so rigid within our system, and some of our accountability is for the best. We need to hold ourselves accountable for excellence. And some of our accountability systems are stifling people like Mr. Knoeppel, who may be doing something outside of the box, and we should encourage that instead of stifle it. And so I'd really be interested to hear what our teachers who have great ideas are doing. And I think to that degree, we have organizations like Teach Plus. We have the National Board Cohort who are enabling teachers to think differently about leadership. And we need to continue to drive that and continue to enable that so that that we innovate in education and not just do what we're doing to catch up to all 49 other states in the District of Columbia, but we actually leapfrog all of those. And I think UNLV is taking a leadership role with some of the work that they're doing as well. So
And
let's
so is
keep doing
Nevada
that.
State College with their new college of
And Nevada
education
State College,
coming
absolutely.
too. Jeremy, were you going to say something?
Look, I just think I'd add that I think that underpinning a lot of this, there's this sort of missing element of personal responsibility, right? That I think we need a bit of a community shift. I mean, we're so lucky to have Dr. Jara here, but he can't do it on his own. And Richard's a terrific teacher, but the reality is it's not the responsibility of the Clark County School District to educate my children. It's my responsibility to make sure that my kids get an education, right? Joyce Woodhouse has been probably one of the most tireless advocates for education in the history of the state of Nevada, along with Mo Dennis. There's no doubt about that. But others have to come along the same way. The same thing is true. We talk about all these things in terms of what they are. And even teachers, I think, and I know this is going to be wildly unpopular, but there are teachers that have no business being in the classroom today. There are some that should not be there today. And the reality is we have to be honest with ourselves as individuals, as families, households. We have to have a cultural shift that makes education important again. And that can permeate to the school district and to the legislature. But it's going to start in our households. And I think there's been a piece of that that continues to be missing today. Until the school board meetings are packed with angry parents, right? Or angry teachers, or the buses are going up there, we're not going to have the real type of change that we
But
need.
it's not the school board that really can execute that change. It's the legislature.
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
But that's
yell
the
at the
place where their
school board
voice
all
can be
day
heard.
long.
That's the place where their voice can
Yeah,
be
but
heard.
it gets buried there.
Well,
And
perhaps.
I sort of go to what the group has been saying. First, you need to know what you want. What does it look like? Then you need to know what does that cost. Then you need to figure out how do you differentiate what being a teacher means. And I've heard Dr. Jara talk about master teacher programs, where he actually puts in place programs. Teachers go through it, they automatically get a $20,000 increase in pay. Then, how do you judge them? How do you hold them accountable and see that it's actually beginning to make a shift?
But one of the things that came up earlier in one of the conversations, previous panels, it was talking about the factors outside of the education system. So I love the fact that you just said that, because we have them for 180 days, 6 hours, 11 minutes a day, right? And you're supposed to cure the world and save every child in that time period. What is it that we can do as a community to change the conversation about bringing your community in to help support? Because the factors that affect an education system, like the Annie E. Casey, I think out of the 16 factors, I think only 7 or 8 can actually happen on a school system. I'd love to have all of your thoughts about how do we pull the community in to truly make that happen.
So I had this brilliant idea coming in. I said, I want all our business partners, I want us to go out there and bring in community partners, faith-based organizations to adopt a school. And then we have, and I think we're working to change it. You know, we have the legislation that now all volunteers. You're right. So it just said, okay, well then we have a barrier. So we need to eliminate some of those barriers so then folks can come in and mentor. So what we're doing as an organization is really going more outward facing into the community. I said it this morning, we don't have enough adults for the 320,000 children. So we need an entire community. So our community engagement office is going and meeting with business partners. So then we then need to go to them. We need to go to the communities where our parents are working because they got 2, 3 jobs. I haven't met a parent that doesn't care about their student or their child. So it's then as a system, we can't just continue to say, well, we did a PTA or an SOT meeting and parents didn't come because they don't care. No, it's not that they don't care, it's that they're working. So then how do we go to them and then change what we do? Then why don't we go on a Saturday? Why don't we go knock on doors? You know, so we are, and I'm challenging our organization to get out there into the community. And then we're meeting with the Resort Association as well. And I know that our communications office and engagement office, they're saying, well, we'll go in and put some of our computers and our services to teach parents during their break how they can check in our kids' report cards. So it's just, you know, being that community partner so we're out in front and not just complain to say, well, they just don't come to school.
I think there needs to be more of a community partnership or just a partnership between schools and parents. Like, I understand what Jeremy's saying. I mean, yes, I mean, as a parent myself, like, I push my kids to work hard in school, and it wasn't just because I was an educator. It's something that was instilled in me. You know, everybody, I think, is an educator at one point in time has seen the comic that shows parents and teachers and the report card with the D on it. In the 1960s, it was the parents and the teachers yelling at the kid. And then fast forward to 2000, you know, it's the kids and the kid and the parents yelling at the teacher. I don't think either of those is correct. But I really think, I mean, it needs to be collaborative. And like the state of Nevada, at one point in time, as a parent, we used to have to sign an academic accord that said exactly what you said, Jeremy, that as a parent, I'm responsible for my child. And I think it's one of those things, just like the DSA, it's a black hole. It's a piece of paperwork that was signed that had no meaning.
I know, but I'm telling you, so go back to what your stats this morning. You were talking about the poverty level of the free and reduced lunch. So there's other factors out here that I think as a community we have to talk about. So all of that's true, but there's other factors that I don't know that, and one of your predecessors had said this, there's only so much that the system can do with the product that walks through our doors. So how do you as a community support?
So I'm going to say this because that always just, I get a little bit excited when I hear that. Because I'm going to tell you, and I learned this when I was a principal early on in my career. My superintendent said, I'm going to say this, the parents, I'm going to guarantee you that they're not keeping the good ones at home. The good ones are not staying home, so you need to address the challenges, and you as a leader need to fix it. So we have what we have. Is then how do we reach out to the community? This is a great community. I said it this morning, it's a great community. How do we reach out to the community to help us? You know, then look at across the state. What other departments, you know, have we looked at the Department of Human Health and Services in this community, in the state? And then why don't we look at what they're doing, how they can then help us address some of the issues our children are facing?
I agree, Jeremy, with your point around it being about families. I think I probably have a slightly different stance around the like percent of impact or the potential there, but I agree with you that we have to get more involved. The community has to get more involved with the schools, and that includes families. And where I'll say that I've seen this done really well, I've been having conversations with Lindsay Harper at the Core Academy, and those at Jana at Opportunity 180, and those who are leading schools, and the people who are taking the 2-generation approach. I think somebody mentioned it earlier, in their approach with education, specifically starting at the early childhood level. I think that's where we can start the trend of engaging parents, of engaging family members early on in their children's education or their family members' education, so that we can make it an inviting place. It takes more than just saying it, and it takes more than just implementing a strategy. It takes making our schools and our school environments ones that are inviting, ones that are bilingual, trilingual, the ones that are meeting the needs of the parents just as much as they're meeting the needs of the students, so that it becomes a partnership. Because I know that some of our schools are incredibly inviting to families, and some of our schools, families are scared to go. And it's not just about the school itself, it's about our government systems and everything that surrounds family and what their fears may be. But I think that everybody in this room, businesses, the school district, the city, can work together to ensure that our schools are community centers for our kids and for our families.
And Dr. Morris-Hibbler, can you talk a little, because the city's been doing some things for the past several years, and I believe you've taken that approach, have you not?
Absolutely. And first of all, I'd like to say that in our community, we also need to get over the fact that there's a lane for people, like stay in your own lane, because the city has done a lot, but not without getting beat up pretty harshly in the media. But, I think at some point we know that families live in cities. And so from a city perspective, we partner with the school district, we partner with UNLV around community schools, which are going into some of our most impoverished neighborhoods and trying to build up families. Because to Jeremy's point, we would love to have all the families engaged, but there's a variety of reasons, and he's helped us study a lot of this, so he already knows. There's a variety of reasons why people don't engage the way we think they should. Not that they're not engaged, but just that their engagement doesn't look like our perceived engagement, because we have different lenses. I'm fortunate enough to live in an area where every school is a 5-star. Maybe we have a few 4s. But I know that where I work, almost all the schools are a 2-star or a 1-star. But I also know that they have the lowest income, and I know they have low education, the parents, and they're probably just struggling to make ends meet. So when we look at Maslow and we look at are their basic needs as a parent being met, when we have over 100 students at the school that my kids go to school downtown, so there's over 100 students that are homeless. My son came home and talked about his friend was living in a car. I don't know that that's the school's responsibility. I think that's all of our responsibilities, and we really need to figure out. So from a city perspective, we've really been looking at what we need to do to help our families and our communities. How do we get them up? Is it a workforce issue? Is it an education issue? What do we need to do? Because until we look at it as an ecosystem, it's not just education, affordable housing, workforce, livable wages, all of those things matter. And it's all of those things that a person of poverty, they're dealing with that every day. And they're certainly not saying, well, this is a school district and this is blah, blah. No, they're just living in that whole poverty mindset. And so that brings about a whole different baggage. Now we're investing in pre-K. We have our mobile pre-K bus that's coming out in January. We've been doing community schools. We have been looking at our before and after school programs. We've met extensively with the school district, because I think one of the most important things that we can do is really be a partner to the school district by understanding what their needs are, so that we can be in lockstep with them. And then also just pushing forward, and all the people that don't believe that education is everybody's responsibility, moving right through them. Just because you can't have a workforce, people, if we don't have a sound education system. So when people say that, it's like, well, okay, let's just keep going. But I think that all of those things matter, and I think that across the valley, we're starting to see Henderson get involved. I think North Las Vegas is getting involved. So while originally we were out there in uncharted territory, I see a lot of the other cities joining forces to say, hey, we all want a sound education system, we want a skilled workforce, and we want this community to be something that we're proud of.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for your work. So I know you guys have got questions, and we're running out of time here, so you want to start standing up and so we can take some questions, because this is an amazing panel. So Ms. Allison. And I'm not getting any Twitter questions yet, so if anybody's on Twitter.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Panel, thank you so much. This is a tremendous conversation that needs to happen. And I will tell you that Dr. Jara has seen a fair amount of me, but not enough to know that living in the Valley for 20 years now, that the Clark County School District is exhausted with hearing me talk about equity and access. And how I became the poster child for this, I don't know, but there it is. Do we need to change the funding formula? Yes. I'd like to ask the panel to comment on two things if there's time. First, I think we need to acknowledge the hole that was dug during the economic downturn and fund that too. Because here's the problem. Not only do we need to move forward with a new funding formula, we finally need to implement something on weighted funding. The taxpayers of Nevada have paid for multiple studies that all say almost exactly the same thing. But in addition to that, we now have tremendous backlogs of deferred maintenance all over the place. We have class sizes that impede students' success. We've had no new textbooks for God knows how long, and so does Superintendent Jara. Sorry, sir. So I'd like to ask if anyone has the opportunity to comment on that. And then finally, well, actually, I'll say one more thing in here, but also please let us take back the phrase school choice. School choice is about public schools, neighborhood schools, magnet schools, CTAs, charter schools. Those are all public schools. School choice does not involve public dollars for private schools. And that may not be popular with everyone in this room, but I stand behind that. And finally, if I may just make an observation about what you just talked about. I've been involved with transformative family engagement for many years now. I currently sit on the board of the National Parent-Teacher Association. One of the things I think we lose sight of is our most at-risk students come from families that either had very limited or very negative experiences with education. And so to multiple ones of you who said, all parents want good things for their kids, they do. And we need to respectfully partner with parents. And this has been my other battle cry. Again, I have not, Superintendent Jara has not heard this yet. So I certainly absolve him.
We're going to let you do that on a one-on-one with him, Allison. I'm
saying absolutely. And I have begged and pleaded for partnering respectfully with parents. Dr. Karen Mapp of the Harvard Graduate School of Education says everybody has tools in their toolkit. Yep. And I think several of you said something about let's partner with parents. We have 320,000 students. I can tell you we have 200,000 parents, and we can bring them into supporting student success. Thank you.
All right. Lots of questions in there, I think, but the one that I heard most specifically was about how we pull us back out of where the hole in the recession to get us.
Sure.
Exactly. That's why I look right at it.
Look, Allison, I'll make my response pretty easy. You're right. Right? I mean, that's it. Right? Yes, we dug a big hole. No, we're not even close to digging out of it. Right? I mean, the odd thing is we seem to be aspiring to be adequate. Right? I mean, this is, we really want to get to the middle of the pack. Right? I'll bring the first part of your question and the last part of your question together, which is the question of funding and the deficits that's there and the concept of parents and engagement. To me, the absent piece, the gap, the space between those two things is that we've stopped believing that it's possible. Right? I think that parents and educators and even some students are fatigued. They think that the deck is simply stacked against them. You know, in the early 1960s, Governor Grant Sawyer gave a State of the State address in which he noted and lauded the fact that Nevada's education system was among the very best in the entire United States, and how far we've come from there. Right? And you wonder why the champions of education don't come out and say, we can do this, we'll solve this in 5 years. Here's how we're going to do it. Follow me, I'll show you the right way. Because they all know that the funding underlying that is insufficient to actually allow them to have the tools to do it. We're not going to do it with 30 kids in a classroom. We're not going to do it with HVAC systems. We're not going to do it when teachers are removing lights from their classrooms because they're only allowed to have 3 instead of 4. Right? It's not, if the deck is stacked against us, it's problematic. And I'll go back to Walt, the first superintendent that I had the opportunity to work with. You know, maybe he was the second, but whatever. You know, who went and said, you're right. You know, money is not going to solve all of our problems. And he's absolutely right. But it's going to solve some of them. Yeah. And we should probably start with working through at least a few of those. Right? I am pretty sure that spending more money per student is not going to solve our problem. But I'm pretty damn sure that spending less is going to make them worse, right? And that is where we've been,
You know what?
right? To your point at the beginning of it.
But Jeremy, we've been having the same conversation for 25 years. I feel like it's the equal pay conversation. I've been having it for 25 years and nothing ever changes. So to the point, if we don't decide what good education funding looks like for our community, we're never going to change how we get that money. And if we don't then go out, how did we just elect all of these people? They ran campaigns. They got out and they ran a campaign and they made a case of why they should be the person. Why wouldn't we do the same thing once we knew what we were asking for on why the community should fund it? Because the reason it's never funded is we just keep moving the money we have around and hoping more sales tax comes because nobody wants to say, yes, tax me.
I think that is an excellent point. And with regard, I don't want to minimize the question of school maintenance, right? I mean, how much deferred maintenance are we going to have until it really becomes dangerous? Until we're
It's
closing
there.
down
It's
schools.
dangerous.
It's there. It's dangerous today. And this frightens me. Look, I have 2 kids in schools, and it frightens me that it is dangerous for them to be there in some ways.
But how many people really know what that dollar number is besides the people in this room? How many people really know what that number is? When you know that, then you can care about it. If you care about it, then you can be passionate about driving the people you elected to represent you.
So there's
to
an
make
action
hard
item.
choices, even if they lose their job
Yep.
making it.
There's an action item, though, but it takes a leader. Are you going to raise your hand? Should we follow you on finding the number?
No, look, I'm happy. I will be here to support that guy until he's done doing what he's supposed to do.
So we
right?
will
Until
follow
he's
you.
done. Right.
So we have
right.
we have the number. We have a very close number on what the deferred maintenance and the capital improvement. Because I don't know if folks know that we had to close Green Valley for one day because we had a pipe, right? And to me, it's 2018. Things that as we're building schools, and some of the things we're doing to try to address, and how do we build more efficient schools as we're moving forward, but how do we address the ones that are falling behind, that fell behind? And we need to address that. And the number, with a $4 billion bond that we received, it was short by about $4 billion. So how do we then get to a number to address and go back? To fix the deferred maintenance in the classrooms. I mean, I was in the classroom last week, and it was freezing because there's no heater. So how do you then expect the children to learn and the teachers to teach?
Okay, so we've got another question, but we do want to, we need to wrap it up, but I also just want to put that call out there to you, because I think Jeremy said it best, we're all willing to help, but we're going to have to follow your lead. So,
And we have a great team that's going to help us get there.
all right, terrific. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that I was here last year, and I think there's been a quantum shift in the conversation, the visioning, the recognition of what needs to change, and how to go about doing that through bringing in all the voices, the teachers, the parents, the students, the collaboration. My question is, what can we do, and what can my organization, for example, which is the mission to reimagine education to empower all learners, what can we do as a community member and all the great people that want to support this? What can we do before this legislative session that could make a difference, that could turn the needle? I mean, do we have time to study the best practices to be able to put forth that vision or mission for what we can do in this legislative session? So that's my question, is what can we do to help bring along that leapfrog and that innovation that you've all spoken about so eloquently?
Who wants it?
I'll answer the question. Nobody wants to answer it. Get organized and get mad, right? Get out there. Stay informed, right? The bills are coming out. You're going to have a chance to see them. Governor Sandoval is going to, Governor Sisolak, Governor-elect Sisolak, is going to give his State of the State, I think on the 21st of January. Listen to what his education ideas are. If you can support those, then show up and find a way to support those. The education committees are going to be out there. They're going to be meeting. You can watch, even if you're in school, you can tune them in and watch them, even recorded, and be informed and share them with your colleagues and friends about the things you think need to be done, right? Use your voice to be effective as much as you can. Because I don't remember who said it, but I think it was Jan that said it. The more people that show up and argue and say, this is what we need to do, that's how we're going to make the change. And the fact that you're here and the fact that you've got an email and you got some social network, use it all. Use it all.
I'm running out of voice, but you need a convener. You need a convener.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback, we'll be finalizing our State of the School address as well, which is really going to be our priorities as an organization, where we're going to be moving forward, aligned with the governor-elect, aligned with the legislature, to see what we need to do as we're moving forward, and there's going to be some dollar amounts attached to that.
Anything else from the panel? You guys, thank you so very much. I appreciate your time. I just want to end it on one thing for all of us. With Dr. Metcalf started today, he made a comment to take a statement that makes you uncomfortable and take it on as a challenge. So whatever that statement was that you heard today, or something that you've been thinking about, take that on as a challenge, because I think that's what we can all do, and they all might be completely different. So that's our challenge to you, so hopefully we can do that for you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Terri.